At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Breaking news from the stadium tonight as an anonymous fan foot the bill for 55,000 hot dogs, bringing that sweet tubed meat to everyone in attendance.
Free dogs! Yeah!
55,000 hot dogs? What does that even cost?
While the identity of this Frankfurter philanthropist remains anonymous, their all-beefy generosity will go down in history.
The new Mega Millions. More to win means more to give. How you spend it is up to you.
Yeah!
For game odds and details, visit sceducationlottery.com.
What's up, everybody? You're listening to the Strength and Knowledge Podcast. I'm Dr. Zach Baker, and I have with me today Dr. Asher Roberts, one of our two sports residents here at R2P, completing his March monthly research article review. And today we're talking about professional baseball pitchers, elbow injuries, and is there any utilization of jumping and force plates that can clue us in on their injury risk or potentially performance? And Asher, if you don't mind telling the audience, what was the actual title of the article that you gave, and what led you to go down this route? Why was it appealing to you?
Yeah, so the article is called "What Can a Jump Tell Us About Elbow Injuries in Professional Baseball Pitchers?" And right now in residency, we're going through the elbow, wrist, and hand. And having done one of my clinical rotations with an MLB team or their minor league affiliates, this was actually an article that I heard mentioned a few times on that clinical rotation. People always just talked about it as like the jumping article, and so I wanted to delve into it and kind of see what it talked about.
It's pretty cool how the variety that you can see force plates used in a sports performance world and in a rehab environment as well. I've seen it used in a variety of different ways at the collegiate setting, at the professional setting, some using it in a very basic form and just nitpicking maybe one or two different jumps and one or two different metrics within those jumps. And then you have some organizations that have sports scientists or people in the sports medicine field who are there solely to deep dive into not only the primary, but also the secondary and tertiary metrics as well. So I love the force plates because you can make them as simple or as complex as you would like them to be. And this article, I think they took a relatively simple approach and were able to find some interesting information. Asher, can you talk a little bit about just what the design of the study was and how it was carried out?
Yeah, so this was a case control study. They analyzed over 500 pitchers over a 5-year span between 2013 and 2018, all under one professional baseball organization. So we're talking guys all the way probably from major leagues down to their like low A guys, rookie league, all them. And basically what they were looking at was counter movement jump and its association with elbow injuries. So how the study worked was they had each pitcher go into the force plates and they performed 6 counter movement jumps. And really they were looking at 3 variables here. ERFD, which is eccentric rate of force development, basically how fast do you produce force during the loading phase of the jump. AVCF, which is average vertical concentric force, basically what is the average amount of force you're producing during that jumping part of the jump, right after the loading phase. And then CVI, which is concentric vertical impulse, which is impulse is that area under the curve, which is basically kind of your time component. You know, if you have relatively low impulse, it's going to be a very quick rate of force production, where if it's longer, you're going to be producing force over a longer period of time.
Cool. So with the counter movement jump, and for those not familiar, it's just a basic vertical jump. One of the easiest things that you can track is just simply jump height with athletes. In this study, they're nitpicking a few different phases and a few different metrics associated with those phases. So they look at some components related to the eccentric, some related to the concentric, some having to do with just general force, some with that force that can be produced over time, and then also rate of force development. So kind of 3 different ways to look at how strong or powerful an athlete is in both an eccentric and a concentric component, which we know with throwing is very important to produce enough velocity to get the ball to the plate at the desired speed, but then also be able to control yourself and your body's motion after you release the ball. So, Asher, they went through 6 counter movement jumps. They tracked ERFD, AVCF, CVI. What did they end up finding after they ran the test?
Yeah, so basically over this 5-year period span, there were 61 shoulder injuries and 51 elbow injuries. And immediately they just kind of threw out that shoulder injury variable because they didn't find much correlation with it. But with the elbow injuries, they found a couple significant things. The first one was that ERFD was negatively correlated with injury risk. And the other that there was a correlation between the interaction between your average vertical concentric force and your concentric vertical impulse. So basically, depending on if AVCF was high and CVI was low, that would put you at risk. Or if AVCF was low and CVI was high, you'd be at injury risk.
So basically, if you had a mismatch between the average vertical force you could produce and your vertical impulse during that same time frame.
Correct.
And then with these, what are things that you can actually take away from this? Why do they think that these were correlated to injury or had any association with injury? And I think once you talk through it, it sounds relatively straightforward. It's just a reminder of having a good strength conditioning foundation probably correlates very, very well to injury risk profiling and also sports performance.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of what they found was kind of more inferred. It's more like a working hypothesis. They just saw that like, hey, this is what the variable was, and this guy had an elbow injury. So they're kind of connecting the dots between the two. And it does make sense how they connect them. Basically, if you have a low eccentric rate of force development, and that's going to infer that you're not producing force very quickly during that eccentric phase. So you have an issue with producing force quickly. The idea with how that could lead to an elbow injury is if you can't produce force very quickly during the loading phases, you're going to be much more reliant on more upper body torque during a throwing motion because your legs aren't doing a lot of the work, which is going to obviously put more torque on those joints higher up the kinetic chain, leading to a higher risk of elbow injury.
Yeah, and I think just to familiarize people with the throwing motion, after we end up releasing the ball and we go through that acceleration phase and we enter the deceleration and follow-through phase, that is where that lead leg, it has already struck the ground. Our momentum is carrying us towards the plate, and now it's on that lead leg and our trunk and core to rapidly and efficiently decelerate our body. So if ERFD is low, that eccentric or decelerating component, rate of force development is low, we have a lot of momentum carrying through our body that we're unable to control. So we're going to have to find a different way to do so if the muscles cannot accommodate that. What else did they find in relation to the average vertical concentric force group or that vertical impulse group?
Yeah, so basically they found that mismatch puts you at risk. And kind of makes sense. If you have a high average vertical concentric force, that means you produce a lot of force. If you have then a relatively low concentric vertical impulse, that means you're producing that very high amount of force very quickly. So since throwing is a full body kinetic chain movement, if I'm able to produce a ton of force very quickly, and my upper extremities can't control that force, then I'm going to be at risk for elbow injuries, or really any injury up the chain.
Yeah, so it's really shedding light on both components. There's just a force component to this, and how much force can we generate concentrically and eccentrically, but then how quickly can we tap into that when we look at rate of force development, so how quickly can we get to our maximal force output. But then also, do we have the ability to sustain that over time? Or do we have to do that in a very short amount of time, which I always use the analogy of like 2 18-wheelers going down a hill. And you have one has a mile to stop, and the other one only has 500 feet. The one that has a mile can kind of pump the brakes the whole time and gradually coast to a stop. It can dissipate that force over a long period of time. The brakes probably aren't going to wear out that quickly. The truck that only has 500 feet to slow down, it's got to slam the brakes on. And it may stop in time, but it's going to come at a cost to those brakes. And that's the same thing for our body. It's one thing to be able to have powerful muscles, or in the truck analogy, powerful brakes, but it also is advantageous if we have the ability to tap those brakes as opposed to slamming them on immediately, so we're not dealing with potential cuff injuries or increased stress to adjacent joints that may have to compensate and take on more load. Asher, anything else within this article that either they were able to infer or you were able to take away that you thought was interesting or just relevant to clinical practice?
Yeah, so the other interesting one was that relation between your low average vertical concentric force and your high concentric vertical impulse. That was kind of an interesting correlation there. Definitely not as high of an injury risk as if you have that very high amount of force in a very short amount of time. But what they hypothesized was if you produce relatively low vertical concentric force, but it takes you a while to produce that force, meaning that higher impulse, basically there's going to be a much higher demand on your body for increased motor control, and basically higher EMG activity is what you would see with these kind of pitchers. They have to use more muscles for longer to get there. So that's going to lead to basically a quicker fatigue with throwing. They're not as efficient, if you will, with their throws, so they have to put a lot more effort into them. And so if you're doing a very high pitch count and you're that kind of pitcher, you're probably setting yourself up for some kind of risk of injury.
It forces you to be extremely mechanically efficient in that sense. And as you alluded to, that just takes significantly more coordination and just more calculated effort. As a PT, Asher, you work at our Frederick location. It is an outpatient sports med PT clinic. You get to see a variety of people. You get to see some high-level athletes. You also get to see some youth athletes who are relatively untrained. When people come into the clinic and they are a pitcher and they're maybe potentially coming off of Tommy John, or it's a less serious injury and they just have some general elbow or shoulder soreness, what are things that you think of that are worth looking into or worth training to supplement just a really good orthopedic plan of care, meaning address the shoulder, address the elbow impairments, but now that you have this study, what are other things that you'll keep in mind, either from a testing or an intervention standpoint?
Yeah, so, I mean, we already know that throwing is a full body motion, uses the whole kinetic chain. I think this gives us, as clinicians, a couple of extra tools in our toolbox of things we can look at to kind of tease out some other things that we can work on. Maybe when, say, if someone's pretty acute with an elbow injury, hey, maybe we can get them on the force decks, look at these variables and see, hey, is there a deficit with any of these, and start working on something there. Teaching the body how to use and dissipate force effectively throughout not just the arm, but the legs, the core, all of that. Basically, like, this isn't going to give us all the information we need to determine if a pitcher's at risk of injury or if this is the reason that the injury happened. A lot of other things come into play. Your mechanics, genetics, you could just be a more lax person in general. Your throwing mechanics in general can put you at risk. But this gives us an extra thing that we can look at to see, hey, is there anything that's jumping out to us when we put someone on the force decks and have them do a counter movement jump?
It's a good reminder that just being generally athletic and in good shape tends to bode well for athletic performance, even if there's not an immediate or exact transference between the athletic task you're doing and the sporting task that you're doing. Throwing is a largely rotational, horizontal displacement of force, transferring weight from one leg to the other. It's asymmetrical, it's unilateral. You have literally one part of your body doing the exact opposite of what its counterpart's doing. Your right leg and left leg are doing the opposite things from a kinetic standpoint. One's going into flexion, one's going into extension. One's going into ER, one's going into IR. But the counter movement jump is the opposite. It's a bilateral, symmetrical, vertical displacement activity, And it's pretty cool to show that even though they're drastically different movement profiles, you can take meaningful information from each one. So I think from a training standpoint, it also reminds me, hey, we need to do sport-specific activity to prep them for the demands of the sport. But it is perfectly fine to do just some general foundation strength and conditioning when we're looking at strength development, power development, or we're just training energy systems, and maybe we're trying not to put the body through the same stresses that it's going to encounter when they're pitching or when they're doing whatever their sport is. So just a friendly reminder that usually well-rounded athletes tend to be very good at the sports that they play. Asher, any other takeaways from this, or do you think we hit it all?
I think we hit it all.
Awesome. If you are listening and you enjoyed this episode, please share, like, and subscribe. You're listening to the Strength and Knowledge Podcast. This is Dr. Zach Baker, Dr. Asher Roberts. Thanks for listening.
Breaking news from the stadium tonight as an anonymous fan foot the bill for 55,000 hot dogs, bringing that sweet tubed meat to everyone in attendance.
Free dogs! Yeah!
55,000 hot dogs? What does that even cost?
While the identity of this Frankfurter philanthropist remains anonymous, their all-beefy generosity will go down in history.
The new Mega Millions. More to win means more to give. How you spend it is up to you.
Yeah!
For game odds and details, visit sceducationlottery.com.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No